The morning sun spilled its golden light across the bustling streets of the city, illuminating the towering glass buildings that scraped the sky. Among these monuments of commerce and power, one building stood taller, more commanding, yet silent in its dominance. Employees and visitors alike moved in and out of its grand entrance, briefcases in hand, heels clicking against the marble floors, smartphones glued to their ears. To most, it was just another day, a routine march of business and ambition. But this day, and this building, were about to teach a lesson no one in its polished halls would soon forget. At the revolving doors of the lobby, the security checkpoint buzzed with activity. Guards in crisp uniforms scanned IDs, checked bags, and directed the flow of people with practiced efficiency. One of the younger guards, a man named Jason, prided himself on his vigilance. He had learned quickly that appearances could be deceiving, but he also relied heavily on instinct. It was an instinct honed by long hours, occasional encounters with opportunists, and a city that demanded caution at every turn. Today, though, his instincts would lead him astray in a way that would change him forever. Through the revolving doors came an elderly woman. Her frame was slight, her posture bent from years of labor and life's invisible burdens. Her clothing, though tidy, was simple and plain, betraying none of the wealth or status she possessed. Her hair, silver and neatly pinned, shimmered in the sunlight, and her hands, gnarled with age, clutched a small leather handbag. She moved with a quiet dignity, slow but purposeful, as if she had somewhere important to be. To anyone observing casually, she might have seemed like a passerby, a visitor, or perhaps someone who had wandered in by mistake. Jason noticed her immediately. He straightened in his stance, the routine alertness kicking in. There was something about her, he thought, something that required attention. Her eyes, though kind, held an intensity that suggested she was accustomed to being ignored or worse, dismissed. He waited for her to approach the security counter, ready to perform his duty. When she stopped before him, placing her handbag gently on the scanner, he peered at her ID, expecting some sort of visitor pass. The ID was legitimate, but it was not familiar to him. Jason's brows furrowed. Protocol dictated that all entries be verified, and this woman's credentials did not match any expected visitor or staff member for that hour. A sense of suspicion crept in, subtle but insistent. He looked up at her, trying to reconcile the image before him with the rigid expectations of the building's security protocols. In his mind, assumptions formed, fueled by habit and the countless minor incidents he had dealt with over the years. "You can't enter," he thought, though the words remained unspoken. His hand raised slightly, a gentle yet firm motion signaling that she needed to stop, to explain, to justify her presence. The woman's face remained calm, composed, unshaken by the invisible barrier between them. Her eyes met his, and there was a quiet patience there, a depth that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of the lobby, beyond the glass walls, and into a history he could not yet perceive. Minutes passed. People around them continued their routines, some glancing curiously, others too absorbed in their own worlds to notice the quiet tension. Jason felt a growing impatience. He had duties to perform, schedules to keep, and rules to enforce. The woman, he thought, was just another person resisting the flow, another anomaly in a world that demanded efficiency. Yet, something about her presence pressed against his assumptions, unsettled his routine. He demanded she provide further identification, more proof, an explanation for why she needed to enter. She complied, reaching into her handbag with deliberate care, producing papers that were official, intricate, and authoritative. Jason scanned them, but his mind clung stubbornly to his first impressions. He was certain she was a visitor who did not belong here. He raised his voice slightly, firm enough to assert control, careful to avoid confrontation but insistent that she follow procedure. Around them, whispers began to rise, the subtle murmur of curiosity spreading among passers-by. The woman did not flinch, did not argue, only presented herself with an unwavering sense of purpose. It was then that the first crack in Jason's certainty began to form. A colleague, a senior guard with years of experience, approached quietly, glancing at the documents in her hands. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question passing between them. Yet Jason remained resolute, convinced that his judgment was sound, that his instincts, shaped by years of vigilance, were correct. The woman, serene and patient, waited, her presence almost meditative against the backdrop of the bustling lobby. And in that moment, unbeknownst to Jason, the building itself seemed to shift, the air carrying a subtle reminder that appearances can deceive, that assumptions can blind, and that humility often arrives unannounced, in the most unexpected forms. The stage was set for a revelation that would not only challenge his perception, but force a confrontation with his own biases and the way he measured respect and authority. The tension lingered, a fragile pause in the rhythm of the lobby. As the elderly woman stood quietly, her eyes steady and knowing, she did not demand recognition, she did not plead, she simply existed within her truth, an unacknowledged force that was about to reshape the understanding of everyone present. Jason, still unaware of her true identity, felt a rising discomfort, a subtle unease, as if the air itself whispered that he had judged too quickly, acted too firmly, and that the world was far more complex than the binary rules he had learned to enforce. And just as he prepared to issue another instruction, the moment shifted. A figure approached from the main office, a subtle authority radiating from every step. The documents in the woman's hands were examined, and the truth, unexpected, shocking, undeniable, began to reveal itself. The weight of realization pressed down upon Jason, his certainty dissolving, leaving him suspended between duty and regret. The woman, quiet and composed, stood patiently, her dignity intact. The secret of her power still wrapped around her like a cloak, waiting for the proper moment to unfold. And in that stillness, a lesson lingered for anyone who observed, that respect is earned not by assumption, that authority is not always visible, and that life has a way of balancing its scales, often when least expected. The lobby continued its rhythm, oblivious to the unfolding moral revelation, yet within that pulse of the city. The first chapter of a story about judgment, humility, and unexpected justice had already begun. The morning had settled into a steady hum of activity, yet the air around the building's grand lobby remained charged with an unspoken tension. The elderly woman, calm and composed, stood quietly as Jason wrestled with his conscience, the documents in her hands still crisp and official, yet seemingly impossible. With every glance, every passing second, the truth began to ripple through his mind, like a stone dropped into still water. He had judged her, denied her entry, and assumed the worst. And now, the foundations of his certainty were crumbling. The senior guard who had approached earlier looked over Jason's shoulder, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. The papers the woman held were more than legitimate. They were authoritative documents identifying her not as a visitor, not as a tenant, but as the actual owner of the building. Every word, every seal, every signature confirmed what Jason had refused to believe. The woman he had questioned, the woman he had obstructed, held the ultimate authority here. Jason's heart pounded. Embarrassment surged first, sharp and unforgiving, followed by a deep, gnawing regret. He had acted hastily, allowed his assumptions to dictate his actions, and now the reality of his misjudgment weighed heavily upon him. Around him, colleagues noticed the shift in his demeanor, subtle yet unmistakable. Whispers began to ripple through the lobby, curious glances thrown toward the quiet confrontation at the entrance. The city's rhythm continued unabated, yet in this small pocket time seemed suspended, caught between an error and its correction. The elderly woman, fully aware of the commotion she had unwittingly stirred, made no move to confront or scold. She simply held her posture, serene, embodying a dignity that could not be diminished by doubt or challenge. In that quiet presence, the reality of power, patience, and moral authority began to resonate, not through force or anger, but through a quiet insistence that truth carries its own weight. Jason swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. The realization hit him fully. Every procedure he had followed, every rule he had enforced, had failed to account for the subtlety of human dignity, the invisible authority of experience, and the necessity of humility. The woman's age, her modest attire, the gentle patience with which she presented herself, all of these had blinded him to the obvious, to the truth that authority and respect do not always announce themselves through appearance. The senior guard stepped forward, nodding subtly to the woman, acknowledging her rightful position. A wave of murmurs moved through the crowd of employees and visitors, a collective recognition that something extraordinary had just occurred. Yet the woman did not relish the attention. She did not demand applause or acknowledgement. Her calmness spoke volumes. She did not need to assert her power because it was intrinsic, unquestionable, and backed by the legitimacy of her position. Jason's regret transformed into a deeper, more reflective emotion. He felt shame, certainly, but also a budding clarity. He had witnessed a lesson in humility, patience, and moral authority, delivered without a single word from the woman herself. She had simply existed within her truth, and in doing so, revealed the arrogance and impatience that can arise when one assumes authority without understanding. Around them, life continued. Employees hurried past, visitors chatted on phones, and security routines pressed on. Yet for Jason, nothing would ever feel the same. The simple act of denying entry, born from instinct and assumption, had been met with an extraordinary reveal of truth. The experience etched itself into his consciousness. Appearances deceive, power is often invisible, and judgment without knowledge is a dangerous and humbling act. The elderly woman finally moved, stepping forward with a quiet grace. As she entered the building, the atmosphere shifted subtly, a ripple of acknowledgement moving through those nearby. Jason stepped aside almost instinctively, allowing her passage. The senior guard followed, observing silently, a slight smile hinting at the unspoken lesson being imparted. Within the corridors, the woman's presence commanded attention without effort. Employees passing by instinctively straightened, not out of fear, but out of a deep, almost instinctual recognition of respect. It was the kind of recognition that is earned through life, experience, and integrity, rather than imposed through titles or commands. And yet, the real impact was on Jason, whose conscience weighed heavily with the realization that he had failed to honor what should have been obvious. As the day unfolded, whispers began to spread beyond the lobby. Visitors recounted what they had seen, employees repeated the story, and a quiet moral began to take root in the minds of everyone who had witnessed even a fragment of the event. The lesson was clear. Respect should never be withheld based on assumptions, and authority is not always what it seems. Humility, patience, and empathy are values that reveal themselves only when one looks beyond the surface. By mid-morning, Jason found himself replaying every moment, every decision, every assumption he had made. He realized that the error had not been the act of caution itself, but the way it had been applied without discernment. Life, he understood now, is full of unseen truths, hidden identities, and lessons waiting to be recognized. In his rush to uphold rules and enforce order, he had overlooked the most fundamental principle: treat every human being with respect until proven otherwise. For the measure of a person is not always visible, and the consequences of misjudgment can echo far beyond a single moment. As the elderly woman moved further into the building, Jason remained at the entrance, a quiet reflection settling over him. The building, once just a structure of glass and steel, had transformed in his perception. It was no longer just a monument to commerce or status. It had become a living lesson, a stage on which human error, humility, and moral awakening intersected. And in that stillness, Jason understood that the journey he had begun, one of judgment, misperception, and now revelation, was far from over. The day continued around him, yet for Jason, time had slowed. He had witnessed a truth that demanded introspection, a moral lesson delivered not through anger or confrontation, but through patience, dignity, and the quiet assertion of rightful authority. He felt the weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders, not just for the immediate mistake, but for every moment in which assumptions might cloud judgment, for every time empathy might be postponed in favor of routine or instinct. And in that realization, a subtle shift began within him, a resolve to act differently, to observe more carefully, and to honor the unseen truths of those around him. The story of the morning was far from over, and the events yet to unfold would deepen the lessons already imparted. Chapter 3. The elderly woman moved through the building with a quiet authority that seemed to draw the very walls into her orbit. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, yet effortless, as if the corridors themselves had been designed to accommodate her presence. Employees, who had initially only glanced in her direction with mild curiosity, now found themselves instinctively acknowledging her passage. There was no demand in her demeanor, no assertion of power, only the unmistakable aura of someone accustomed to authority, of someone whose decisions had shaped the very structure in which they now walked. Jason remained at the entrance, the image of her composed figure etched into his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the moment he had refused her entry, the raised hand, the assumption that had seemed so justified at the time. Regret pressed down on him in waves, not the fleeting kind that passes with a sigh, but a deep, insistent weight that demanded attention. He realized painfully that his behavior had been rooted not in malice, but in bias, in assumptions shaped by appearances, and in the unquestioned routines of his profession. The morning continued, yet a strange stillness seemed to linger over the lobby. Visitors and employees whispered quietly among themselves, sharing fragments of what had occurred. The story was spreading not through official channels, but organically, carried by the quiet astonishment of those who had witnessed even a part of it. Some were skeptical at first, unable to believe that such a modest-looking woman could possess such authority. Others, however, recognized immediately the deeper lesson, that power, dignity, and moral authority are often invisible, waiting for those who misjudge to recognize them. Inside, the woman made her way to a conference room on the top floor, her movements unhurried. Her purpose was not to confront or reprimand, but to ensure the smooth operation of the building, a responsibility she had borne for years. Each interaction along the way was marked by subtle grace, a nod to a passing employee, a gentle acknowledgement to the cleaning staff, a quiet encouragement to the administrative assistants. Through her actions, she conveyed the message that leadership is not about asserting dominance, but about fostering respect, dignity, and a sense of belonging. Meanwhile, Jason could not shake the lesson from his mind. He began to see how easily assumptions can distort reality, how quickly authority can be mistaken, and how fragile the balance of respect can be. He recalled the countless instances in which he had judged visitors or colleagues, assuming knowledge that he did not possess. The weight of this reflection brought with it a profound sense of responsibility. He understood that the error he had made was not merely personal, but symbolic of a larger truth, that the failure to see the humanity and dignity of others can have consequences far beyond a single encounter. The elderly woman, oblivious to the storm of reflection she had triggered, continued her day with serene focus. She checked documents, reviewed schedules, and attended meetings with a quiet efficiency that belied the complexity of the operations she managed. Staff members who had initially questioned her presence now moved with a renewed respect, offering assistance without hesitation, deferring to her authority without fear, and acknowledging her expertise with genuine regard. Her presence became a living lesson in the ethics of humility, leadership, and respect, a lesson that reached far beyond the walls of the building. As the day progressed, Jason found himself unable to focus on routine tasks. His mind kept returning to the incident at the entrance, to the moment he had misjudged the woman, to the subtle, undeniable authority she exuded. Each time he replayed the event, a new layer of understanding emerged. The importance of patience, the necessity of questioning assumptions, and the profound impact of respect. He realized that authority is not always loud or demanding. It is often quiet, persistent, and rooted in integrity. Around the building, the story of the morning continued to ripple outward. Employees discussed the incident in hushed tones. Visitors recounted it to colleagues, and a subtle lesson in moral awareness began to permeate the environment. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that the day had provided more than routine operations. It had provided an encounter with a truth that many overlooked in their daily lives. The woman's presence had illuminated the gap between perception and reality, between assumption and understanding, and between the superficial markers of status and the enduring markers of character. Jason eventually approached his supervisor, seeking guidance on how to reconcile his actions with the unfolding reality. The senior guard, observing the interaction, spoke quietly but firmly, emphasizing that mistakes are part of life, but reflection and learning are the paths to redemption. Jason absorbed these words with a humility that had been absent in the morning, feeling the weight of accountability, and recognizing that true growth comes from confronting one's own errors with honesty and resolve. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, the elderly woman concluded her rounds. She paused at the lobby, offering a gentle smile to the security team, her eyes conveying understanding rather than reproach. In that moment, Jason felt a profound sense of both relief and renewed determination. He realized that the lessons of the day were far from over. The encounter had planted seeds of moral awareness that would continue to grow, shaping his behavior and his interactions in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. And as she finally exited the lobby, her presence lingering like an unspoken reminder of dignity and authority, Jason knew that the true power of the morning was not in the documents she carried, nor in the title she held, but in the example she had set. Her actions, quiet and deliberate, had demonstrated that respect is earned through integrity, patience, and unwavering adherence to truth. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the quiet moral revolution that had unfolded within one building. And yet for those who had witnessed it, especially Jason, the lesson would remain that judgment without understanding can mislead, that authority is not always visible, and that the smallest act of humility and patience can reveal truths far greater than appearances alone. Chapter 4. The days following the incident in the lobby carried with them an unusual stillness. Though life in the building moved forward with its accustomed efficiency, meetings held, documents signed, elevators humming, an invisible current of awareness lingered. Employees spoke in hushed tones about the elderly woman, recounting her composed demeanor and unassuming authority. Even those who had barely noticed her presence seemed to carry a subtle recognition that something profound had transpired. For Jason, the lesson refused to fade. It had taken root, a quiet insistence within his conscience that demanded reflection and action. Jason arrived at his post the next morning with a newfound caution. He no longer relied solely on instinct or routine. He began observing the people who entered with deliberate attention, seeking to recognize not just the obvious markers of status or authority, but the nuances that reveal character and truth. The memory of the woman, serene and dignified, remained vivid, a constant reminder of how quickly assumptions can mislead and how easily respect can be withheld from those who deserve it most. The story of the woman's true identity spread beyond the immediate building, carried by employees who had interacted with her during her rounds. Some described her as intimidating, others as inspiring, but all agreed on one point. She embodied a moral clarity that transcended title or wealth. The narrative reached higher floors where executives and managers began to reconsider their own biases, policies, and assumptions. The ripple effect of her presence was subtle yet undeniable, reminding everyone that the invisible threads of respect, humility, and integrity could influence behavior far more than formal structures or authority alone. Jason's own life began to shift in ways he had not anticipated. He found himself more patient with visitors, more considerate of colleagues, and increasingly aware of the impact his judgments could have. He remembered the shock, the embarrassment, and the profound sense of awe he felt when confronted with the woman's true role. That morning had been more than an encounter. It had been a revelation, a moral awakening that transformed the way he perceived the world around him. The elderly woman, meanwhile, continued her daily routines with the same quiet efficiency and grace. She paid little attention to the whispers and stories spreading through the building. Her focus remained on her responsibilities, on ensuring that the operations she oversaw were seamless, and that the people within her domain were treated fairly and with dignity. Yet, despite her calm demeanor, the lessons she imparted extended far beyond her immediate actions. Employees began to internalize the principles she embodied: humility, patience, respect for others, and the understanding that authority is not always immediately visible. One afternoon, a situation arose that tested these lessons. A young visitor, unfamiliar with the building's protocols, attempted to bypass security, relying on a confident demeanor and borrowed credentials. Jason noticed immediately. His instincts sharpened not by suspicion, but by the tempered awareness he had gained over the past days. Rather than reacting with the same rigidity he once would have, he approached the situation with a measured patience, giving the visitor the benefit of the doubt while still ensuring proper procedure. The encounter ended smoothly, with the visitor complying willingly and a quiet acknowledgement of Jason's respectful approach. This small victory reinforced the profound impact of the morning when he had misjudged the elderly woman. He realized that respect is not a transactional act, demanded through authority or intimidation. It is a deliberate choice, expressed through patience, attentiveness, and the willingness to see beyond surface impressions. The experience had taught him that every individual, regardless of appearance or circumstance, deserves the opportunity to be recognized for their true worth. Beyond the walls of the building, the incident began to influence a wider audience. News of the security encounter reached social media, shared by employees and visitors who had witnessed the initial moment or had heard the story secondhand. The narrative resonated widely because it touched on universal themes: the danger of assumptions, the humility of acknowledging mistakes, and the moral clarity of honoring truth and dignity. People commented on the story, reflecting on their own experiences, their own judgments, and the moments when they had misread someone's value or underestimated their authority. Within the building, the elderly woman remained a silent anchor. Her presence felt even when she was not visible. Employees adjusted their behavior not out of fear, but out of respect for the principles she exemplified. Jason, particularly, carried the weight of the lesson with him constantly, ensuring that his decisions reflected consideration, empathy, and an awareness of the unseen truths that so often lie beneath appearances. As the week drew to a close, the impact of the encounter became increasingly clear. It was no longer just a story of a misjudged visitor or a security guard's mistake. It had evolved into a broader reflection on morality, integrity, and human decency. The building itself, once a neutral backdrop of commerce, had transformed into a stage for an ongoing lesson in respect and moral awareness. Every individual who walked its halls carried with them the subtle reminder that assumptions could deceive, and that humility and patience were far more powerful than immediate judgment. By the end of the week, Jason had grown into a different version of himself, more attentive, more respectful, more conscious of the lives and dignity of those around him. The elderly woman, without uttering a single word in confrontation or chastisement, had reshaped the environment and its people through the quiet assertion of her rightful authority. Her influence was not enforced through power, but conveyed through patience, integrity, and unwavering adherence to truth. And as the building returned to its usual rhythm, life inside its walls had shifted. The lessons of that morning, judgment, humility, respect, and the profound impact of recognizing true authority, had become embedded in the daily consciousness of all who had witnessed, however briefly, the extraordinary presence of the woman who had once been denied entry. Chapter 5 weeks passed, yet the memory of that morning never left Jason. The incident with the elderly woman had become more than a single moment of embarrassment. It had transformed into a persistent lesson, echoing in every decision he made and every interaction he had. Each visitor he guided, every employee he observed, reminded him that assumptions could blind, that appearances could deceive, and that the measure of a person's worth often lay hidden beneath the surface. The city continued its relentless rhythm outside the building, but within its walls, a subtle moral awakening had taken root. The elderly woman, now fully integrated into the daily flow of operations, continued to exemplify leadership through quiet dignity. She moved through the corridors with effortless grace, engaging with employees, visitors, and staff in a manner that reinforced the values of respect, patience, and humility. She never flaunted her authority, nor did she demand recognition for her position. Instead, she allowed her presence and actions to speak for themselves, demonstrating that true power is rooted not in titles or appearances, but in integrity, responsibility, and ethical consistency. One afternoon, Jason observed a small incident that crystallized the lessons he had absorbed. A young employee, nervous and flustered, accidentally spilled coffee near a group of executives. In another time, Jason might have reacted with irritation or reprimand, judging the mistake harshly. But now, shaped by his encounter with the elderly woman, he approached calmly, offering assistance and guidance rather than criticism. The employee, reassured and supported, continued with confidence, and Jason felt a quiet satisfaction in having acted with understanding rather than assumption. The story of the woman's rightful authority continued to circulate, reaching beyond the building's immediate occupants. Visitors shared the narrative with colleagues, friends, and family, emphasizing not just the shock of the revelation, but the deeper moral it conveyed. Humility, patience, and recognition of human dignity are values that transcend rank, wealth, or appearances. Social media began to amplify the story, and the narrative of "security denied old woman entry, turns out she owned the building" became a symbol for moral awareness, ethical conduct, and the enduring power of quiet authority. Within the building, a subtle transformation took place. Employees became more attentive, more considerate, and more conscious of the impact of their judgments. Security protocols continued, but they were tempered with patience, empathy, and the awareness that every individual deserved the benefit of respect until proven otherwise. Jason, in particular, became a model of this new approach, guiding colleagues and visitors alike with a calm vigilance informed by experience, reflection, and moral insight. The elderly woman, ever composed, continued to fulfill her duties with an unassuming authority. She attended meetings, reviewed operations, and interacted with staff in a manner that reinforced the principles of fairness, patience, and ethical leadership. She did not seek accolades, yet the effect of her presence was undeniable. Every corridor she passed, every interaction she engaged in, carried a lesson for those who observed. That true authority is recognized not through appearances or assertiveness, but through consistency, integrity, and the quiet assertion of truth. Jason often reflected on the transformation within himself and his colleagues. The morning he had misjudged the woman had been the catalyst, a moment of moral awakening that reshaped his approach to life. He understood now that mistakes are inevitable, but reflection, accountability, and a commitment to learning from them can turn error into wisdom. He saw how one moment, one interaction, and one decision could ripple outward, affecting not only immediate circumstances, but also the culture and consciousness of an entire community. The woman's presence became emblematic of a larger truth, that the values of respect, humility, and integrity must guide actions in every sphere of life. Those who assumed authority without understanding, those who judged too quickly, and those who overlooked the humanity of others were gently reminded through her example that the consequences of misjudgment extend far beyond a single encounter. Her silent authority carried with it a moral weight that shaped behavior, fostered awareness, and encouraged ethical reflection in everyone who crossed her path. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the glass and steel of the building, Jason paused at the lobby entrance. He looked out at the bustling streets, at the flow of people coming and going, and he realized that life, much like the building itself, is full of hidden depths, unseen authority, and moral lessons waiting to be recognized. The elderly woman had returned to her office for the day, but her influence lingered like a quiet echo, reminding him and all who had witnessed the morning incident of the importance of humility, respect, and the recognition of true worth. In the weeks and months that followed, the story became part of the building's lore. New employees were told of the morning when assumptions had been shattered, when judgment had been replaced by understanding, and when a single act of quiet patience revealed the enduring importance of moral awareness. Jason carried the lesson with him always, applying it to his interactions, his judgments, and his understanding of others. He had learned that respect is never to be assumed, that authority may be hidden, and that the true measure of a person is found not in appearance, but in integrity and character. And so, the story concluded not with confrontation or spectacle, but with enduring transformation. The elderly woman, the unassuming yet rightful owner of the building, had imparted a lesson that would resonate for years, that life demands humility, patience, and respect, that assumptions can mislead, and that true authority and moral clarity are recognized through quiet action, unwavering integrity, and the courage to uphold truth without ostentation. The building, once simply a monument to commerce, had become a testament to moral awakening, human dignity, and the enduring impact of one person's quiet authority. And within it, Jason and all who had witnessed the morning's revelation carried forward a deeper understanding, a renewed sense of empathy, and a commitment to act with awareness, respect, and moral courage in every encounter, forever changed by the woman who had taught them the most important lesson of all.